Hello guys, hope you all are doing great. So this video is to show how to fetch the data from a web API which is secured by an Azure Authentication. So if a web API is secured by an Azure Authentication, the data which is present in that web API cannot be directly accessed by any user. Okay, it will require an access token in order to obtain or fetch the data which is present in that web API. So we will be looking on how to do that or how to access the data from that API which is actually secured with Azure Authentication using Power Apps Cloud Flow. Okay, so here there are few prerequisites which is required. So first thing, you will need an URL from which the access token will be generated. So this URL will be application specific credential. This will be different for different applications. So it will be something like this. It's going to be from microsoftonline.com, and here in this place, so usually application tenant ID will be mentioned. So this is the URL where so this is the URL through which the access token is generated. So then we will need a content type. So content type, usually it's going to be this double quoted string which is mentioned. So this is not an application specific credential. This is going to be most common. So this describes like what kind of data are you fetching, what kind of data it or what type of content is actually present inside that web API. Okay, so next, moving forward, next is a client ID and client secret. So these two, client ID and client secret, will be unique for each application. So it's again it's like a password for the application. So it will be application specific credential, both client ID and client secret. And grant type is another attribute which we'll be using, and grant type will be mentioning it as client credentials because we are using the client ID and client secret of the application. So next is the resource. So in the resource, we'll have to mention the URL of the application. So for example, this is not the web API URL, this is the URL of your application which is actually listed or which is actually using the Azure App Service. And this is again, it's going to be an application specific credential. So finally, we will need the web API URL from which the data will be retrieved, from which we have to actually pull in the data from. So these two URLs are different. One is the application URL, the next is a web API URL from which we'll be retrieving the data. So we are just quickly moving to the Power Apps portal. And yeah, here is the Power Apps portal. It's just make.powerapps.com, or there are a few other URLs available for it. So over here, we'll just go to flows. Okay, so we're going to go to new flow, and I'm not going to start a flow from a template. If you want, we can start a flow from a template, or here I'll just be choosing an instant cloud, and I will just give the name for my flow as get API. So get data from web API. Okay, and I'm going to choose a manual trigger because I don't want it to schedule or something. Let's just keep it as manual trigger. And yep, so here's our trigger ready. So first step, so we'll click on the new step, and the first action whenever we trigger this flow, it's going to be HTTP post request. So we want to choose this HTTP works. So in the method, I'll be selecting the method as post method. Okay, and here in this URL, we must be putting the URL of the like we must putting the URL from where we are fetching the access token from. So this, so next we're going to use in the headers, so we'll be mentioning our content type in the headers. This is very important. So if there is no content type, so this will not work correctly, or it's going to misbehave a lot. So content type is important. So here is my content type, and the value of the content type will be the same whatever we have mentioned in double quotes. So we are just telling the flow that this is the content, or the content is in this type we want to pull out from. So yeah, that's it. And when we scroll down, we can see here we have mentioned there's a space or text box available for body. So whatever the prerequisites I explained to you, we will be creating a body using those. Okay, so here is the body which will be creating it in a particular format. So first the client ID equal to the value of your client ID and an ampersand. Ampersand here is the separator between the different values or attributes, and then we are giving the client secret, the value of the client secret of your application, and grant type is equal to client credentials, it's the constant one, and resource is equal to your application URL. So we'll be copying this the entire body and putting it in the HTTP post method body. Okay, so this is done. I have just pasted the body. As you can see, the details in the body are masked since it's a confidential information. So our HTTP post method is ready. We have to give the URL, the content type, and the body. So the next step will be parse JSON. So parse JSON is used to convert whatever is the access token which we are getting it from this HTTP post method. We'll be converting that to a JSON format using the parse JSON action. And here in the content, we'll be selecting the body. So body is the last output which is coming from the HTTP post method. So that output we are making it as an input for the parse JSON or the content for the parse JSON. And in the schema, we'll be mentioning what is the type of data we are using or this is just a type of data or which has to be converted in this type. The data whatever is coming in the body, it has to be converted to this type. We're just telling it to the tool that this should be the format of the data, right? So this is about parse JSON, and then after parse JSON, it's just the last step where we'll be using another HTTP action. So here, this HTTP action will be giving it a get method. Okay. So, and here in the URL, we will be giving the URL of the web API, which we will fetch the data from, where the actual data is present. That is the URL which we have to give it over here. Okay, so as you can see, the URL I have pasted over here, but it is masked because that is also confidential. And yeah, again in the headers we have to give something called as authorization. So in the value for authorization, we will have to give the bearer is the text which we have to give, and after giving a space, just after the bearer we just have to give one tab space. Then we have to select the access token over here which is coming from the parse JSON. So the output of the parse JSON, whatever is the token coming from the output of the parse JSON, we have to select that over here. And yeah, this is done actually. So now the contents for the get method, only two things. One is the URL from where the web API URL from where we have to fetch the data, and the authorization header. So this is done. We'll just click on save. Yeah, it is saved without any errors. So now let's just test our flow. I'm going to select manual, test, run flow, done. Yeah, here we are. Our flow ran successfully. Let's just expand this and check what is the actual access token which is generated if you expand this first HTTP action. So if you can see the last part of that is body. In the body, if you just scroll down over here, you can see there is an action to access token which is generated. Okay, and in the last HTTP method, get method, if we expand and if you go down, you can see there is some data in the body. That is just the name of some cities and the some just some numbers. So yeah, this is the actual data which was present in my web API, which is being displayed in the body over here. Okay, so that's about it. So thank you all for watching the video.